Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
I never thought my own sister would steal from me, let alone my wedding fund. But what shocked me even more was how my parents defended her. They actually told me to be grateful for family after she spent my money on a party for herself. I've always been a planner. While other teenagers were spending their summer paychecks on clothes or trips, I was tucking mine away into a savings account labeled Future. At the time, I didn't know exactly what that future would look like, but I had one goal in mind: my wedding. I envisioned something classic but intimate. Nothing extravagant like the over-the-top celebrity weddings you see in magazines, but also not a quick courthouse ceremony. I wanted to walk down the aisle in a beautiful dress, surrounded by loved ones, with meaningful little details that reflected who I was. To make that happen, I knew I'd need to be smart about money. So, I started early. Every birthday check from grandparents, every Christmas bonus from my part-time jobs, and even the occasional cash gift from relatives all went into the fund. In college, while my peers were partying, I was babysitting, tutoring, and working retail shifts. I skipped expensive spring breaks and kept my lifestyle modest, knowing it would all pay off someday. By the time I graduated and landed my first full-time job, I'd built a solid nest egg. Over the years, that fund grew steadily. My fiancé, Mike, and I were ecstatic when we did the math. We had saved $20,000. It felt like a small fortune to us. "This is it," I told Mike one night as we sat on the couch looking at wedding venues. "This is what all those sacrifices were for." He kissed my forehead and said, "You're amazing. We're going to have the wedding of your dreams." But life has a funny way of derailing dreams, doesn't it? In my family, there's always been a running joke about my younger sister, Laura. While I was the responsible, level-headed one, Laura was the whirlwind, charming but impulsive. She's 4 years younger, with a knack for getting exactly what she wants. My parents doted on her endlessly, calling her the golden child, though they'd never admit it outright. Laura always seemed to fall upwards. Failing a class? My parents hired her a private tutor. Crashing her car? They bought her a new one. Meanwhile, I had to fight for every little thing. I couldn't resent her entirely. She had this magnetic personality that drew people in, but it always bothered me how little accountability she faced. Still, I never imagined my wedding fund would end up on Laura's radar. It was mine, carefully built over years, and meant for one of the most important milestones of my life. She had no reason to care about it, let alone touch it. But hindsight is 2020. Looking back, there were red flags, tiny moments I dismissed as Laura being Laura. There were casual remarks during family dinners, like, "It's crazy how much money you've saved, sis." I could never do that. Or jokes about how I was too frugal. "You've got to live a little, you know," she once said, swirling her wine glass at a family barbecue. "All that saving. It's kind of boring, don't you think?" I laughed it off at the time, not realizing how those words would come back to haunt me. It was a quiet Thursday morning when it happened. I'd made a habit of checking my savings account regularly, especially with the wedding date approaching. That morning, I had just finalized the guest list and was about to confirm a deposit for the florist. It was supposed to be one of those mundane tasks, just another step toward making our big day perfect. But the moment I logged into my account, I froze. My heart skipped a beat as I stared at the numbers on the screen. My balance was nearly halved, $10,000 gone, just like that. I refreshed the page, thinking it had to be some kind of glitch. When the numbers didn't change, panic set in. I scrolled through the transaction history and saw the withdrawal, a single transfer of $10,000, made just 2 days earlier. The transaction was authorized using my account details, and the recipient was marked as personal transfer. I felt my stomach drop. This wasn't some hacker. This was someone who knew me. My first instinct was to call the bank, desperate for answers. After a 15-minute hold, a calm but detached representative confirmed my worst fears. The withdrawal had been made using my account login and security credentials. There was no sign of fraud. I hung up, staring at my phone in disbelief. How could this happen? I had always been so careful with my financial information. But then a single, horrifying thought crept into my mind. Laura. It didn't make sense at first. She wasn't involved in my wedding plans, and she had no reason to care about my savings. But she did have access. Months earlier, I'd given her temporary access to my filing cabinet when she needed help applying for a credit card. At the time, I didn't think twice about it. She was my sister, after all. Still, I didn't want to believe it. I called her immediately, hoping there was some kind of misunderstanding. She answered after a few rings, her voice casual and unbothered. "Hey, "What's up?" she said, as if we were chatting about the weather. I didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Laura, did you take money from my savings account?" My voice was sharper than I intended, but I couldn't help it. There was a long pause, and I could hear her exhale loudly. "Oh," she said finally. "I meant to tell you about that." Her words hit me like a slap. "Tell me what, Laura? You took $10,000 from my account." She let out a small laugh, the kind she used when she thought I was being dramatic. "Relax, okay? I borrowed it for something important. I was going to pay you back." Borrowed it. Borrowed it. She said it like she had taken a pair of earrings or a book, not $10,000 of hard-earned money I'd been saving for years. "What do you mean, borrowed? How did you even get access?" My voice was rising now, trembling with disbelief and fury. Laura sighed, like she was the one being inconvenienced. "It's not a big deal, all right? I needed it, and I knew you'd understand. I used the info from your files when I was at your place. You didn't even notice, so it's not like it's a problem." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You stole from me, Laura. That's not borrowing. It's theft. What could possibly be so important that you needed $10,000? That's when she dropped the bombshell. With the same nonchalant tone, she said, "I threw myself a birthday party. A big one. You know, something memorable." For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. "A birthday party?" I repeated, incredulous. "Yeah," she said, as if it were the most logical thing in the world. "It was my 25th. That's a big deal, you know? I rented a venue, got catering, and even hired a DJ. It was amazing. You should have seen it." I was speechless. My brain struggled to process her words. She had taken $10,000, my wedding fund, to throw herself a party, and she had the audacity to act like it was no big deal. "Are you serious right now?" I finally managed to say. "You spent my money on a party?" Laura huffed, clearly annoyed by my reaction. "Don't be so uptight. It's not like you can't save more money. You're always so good with finances. You'll figure it out." Her casual dismissal of my sacrifice and hard work pushed me over the edge. "Laura, I've been saving for years, for years. That money was for my wedding, not for you to blow on a party." "Well, it's already done," she said, her tone turning defensive. "And besides, you should be happy for me. It was an amazing night, and everyone had a great time. You're acting like I stole from a stranger. We're family." Family. She used that word like it was a free pass to do whatever she wanted. I could feel the anger bubbling in my chest, but I forced myself to take a deep breath. "Laura, you have to pay me back. All of it. Immediately." She laughed again, but this time it was sharper, almost mocking. "I don't have that kind of money right now. Do you think I'm made of cash? I'll pay you back eventually, okay? Stop stressing." I couldn't take it anymore. Without another word, I hung up and stared at my phone, shaking with rage. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the sheer audacity of what she'd done, and the complete lack of remorse she'd shown. As I sat there, trying to calm down, one thought kept running through my mind. My parents. They had to know about this. Surely, they would be just as furious as I was. Surely, they would help me hold Laura accountable. But I was about to find out just how wrong I was. I spent the rest of that day trying to figure out how to confront Laura again. My first conversation with her had left me too angry to think clearly, but as I replayed her words over and over in my head, the reality of what she had done began to sink in. This wasn't some impulsive mistake. Laura hadn't just taken the money. She had planned this, knowing full well it wasn't hers. And worst of all, she didn't even seem to care. That evening, I called her back. This time, I was ready. "Laura," I said, my voice as steady as I could make it. "We need to talk. I want to understand how you thought this was okay. What exactly did you spend the money on?" She sighed loudly, the way she always did when she thought I was being unreasonable. "I already told you. It was for my party. Why are you making this such a big deal? What kind of party costs $10,000, Laura? Be honest with me." That seemed to irritate her, but she relented. "Fine," she said. "It wasn't just a party. It was a themed gala, okay? I rented out a ballroom at the Grand Haven Hotel. It's the nicest venue in town, and I wanted everything to be perfect." "A ballroom?" I repeated, trying to process her words. "You rented a hotel ballroom with my money?" She didn't even flinch. "It's not like I could have a big celebration at home," she said defensively. "And everyone expects something fancy when you turn 25. It's a milestone." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "What else did you spend it on, Laura? $10,000 doesn't disappear on a venue alone." "Oh, you'd love the details," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. I got an open bar, obviously, because what's a party without drinks? And catering. The food was amazing. You would have loved it if you'd been there. Oh, and I hired a professional photographer. Everyone's been talking about how incredible the pictures turned out. As she spoke, I felt my anger rise with each word. She wasn't just unapologetic. She was proud. And the gown, she added casually. You should have seen it. Designer, custom fitted. I looked stunning, if I do say so myself. My jaw dropped. Laura, you spent my wedding fund on a designer gown and an open bar? Her tone turned defensive again. Why are you acting like this is the end of the world? It's just money. You'll make more. I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. That money wasn't just money, Laura. It was my money, and it was for my wedding. Do you have any idea how long it took me to save that? How much I sacrificed to build that fund? She rolled her eyes. Yes, I could hear the eye roll in her voice. Okay, but it's not like you need all that for one day. Weddings are so overrated. You could get married at the courthouse and still have a happy marriage. Isn't that what really matters? Her condescension was too much. This isn't about what you think I need, Laura. It's about the fact that you stole from me. You didn't ask. You didn't even think about how this would affect me or Mike. You just took it, because you wanted a party. Her response? A casual laugh. Oh, come on. It's not like you were using it yet. I figured you'd have time to save more before the wedding. Besides, we're family. Families are supposed to share. The word share made me snap. Laura, sharing means asking and agreeing. This isn't sharing, it's theft. And don't you dare try to use the family excuse to justify this. If you really cared about family, you wouldn't have done this in the first place. She didn't have a real answer to that. Instead, she went on the offensive. You're seriously overreacting. I'm going to pay you back, okay? It's not like I don't plan to. You need to chill out. Laura, when exactly do you plan to pay me back? You don't have a job, and you just blew through $10,000. What's your plan? Her silence spoke volumes. After a long pause, she muttered, I don't know. I'll figure it out. But you don't need to keep rubbing it in my face. The sheer audacity of her words left me speechless. I was furious, but beneath the anger was a deep sense of betrayal. This was my sister, someone I'd grown up with, someone I had trusted, and yet, she saw nothing wrong with what she had done. Laura, I'm giving you one chance to make this right, I said, my voice trembling. You need to return every single dollar, and I mean immediately. Otherwise, I'm taking this to Mom and Dad, and I won't stop there. She laughed again, but this time it sounded nervous. Oh, come on. You're not really going to get them involved, are you? You know how they get. They'll blow this way out of proportion. I didn't answer her. Instead, I hung up and sat there, staring at my phone. I couldn't believe it had come to this. In my mind, I started rehearsing how I would explain everything to my parents. Surely, they would understand. Surely, they would see how wrong Laura was and help me hold her accountable. But deep down, I had a sinking feeling that this wasn't going to go the way I hoped. When I arrived at my parents' house that evening, I was still fuming. I had spent the entire drive rehearsing what I was going to say. My parents might have a soft spot for Laura, but surely this would be the exception. How could they possibly defend stealing? As I walked into the kitchen, I found them sitting at the table, sipping coffee. My mom smiled at me, but my dad barely looked up from his crossword puzzle. I took a deep breath and sat down across from them. We need to talk, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. My mom tilted her head, concerned. What's wrong, sweetheart? I didn't waste any time. It's about Laura. She stole $10,000 from my savings account. I found out today that she used it to throw herself a party. For a moment, there was silence. My mom's smile faltered, and my dad finally set his crossword down. I waited for the outrage, for the inevitable. What was she thinking? Instead, my mom sighed and said, Oh, honey, I'm sure it's not as bad as it sounds. I blinked, stunned. Not as bad? She stole from me, Mom. That money was for my wedding. Well, my dad said, rubbing the bridge of his nose, you're not getting married tomorrow, are you? You've got time to save up more. And it's not like Laura meant to hurt you. She probably just got carried away. Carried away? I repeated, my voice rising. She didn't just take $100 or $1,000. She wiped out half of my savings for a party. And you're acting like it's no big deal. My mom reached out to pat my hand. Sweetheart, I understand you're upset, but think about it from Laura's perspective. It was her 25th birthday. That's a milestone. She just wanted to do something special. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So, You're saying her party is more important than my wedding? Is that what you're telling me? No one's saying that, my dad interjected, his tone firm. But Laura's young. She doesn't always think things through. You've always been the responsible one. You've got a good head on your shoulders. That's why we're not worried about you. You'll figure it out. I felt like I'd been slapped. You're not worried about me? I'm not asking for your pity. I'm asking you to hold Laura accountable. She stole from me. She needs to pay me back. She will, my mom said quickly. She told us she plans to pay you back when she can. You just have to be patient. Patient? I was incredulous. Do you have any idea how long it took me to save that money? How many birthdays and bonuses and late-night shifts went into that fund? And now you want me to wait while Laura figures it out? What if she never does? She's your sister, my mom said gently, as if that explained everything. Families help each other out. Help each other out? I snapped. She didn't ask for help, Mom. She stole. And instead of helping me, you're defending her. Why? My dad's face darkened. Watch your tone, young lady. We're not defending her. We're trying to keep the peace. You think dragging this out is going to help anyone? All you're doing is creating more drama. So, what? I'm supposed to just let her get away with it? Pretend like nothing happened? Of course not, my mom said soothingly. But you could let this be a learning experience for Laura. She's never been as responsible as you, and maybe this will teach her to be better with money. I laughed bitterly. How is she supposed to learn anything if you keep enabling her? You're not even angry. If the roles were reversed, if I had stolen from her, you'd be calling me selfish and irresponsible. Why is it different when it's Laura? It's not different, my dad said, though his tone lacked conviction. We just know you're strong enough to handle this. Laura's, well, she's not. That was it. The golden child excuse. Laura couldn't be held accountable because she was too fragile, too immature. But I was supposed to shoulder the burden because I was the responsible one. I stood up, my hands shaking. You know what? If you won't help me, I'll take care of it myself. I'm giving her 2 weeks to pay me back. If she doesn't, I'm filing a police report. My mom gasped. You wouldn't. She's your sister. She stopped being my sister when she decided her party was more important than my wedding, I said coldly. And if you two want to keep enabling her, fine. But don't expect me to stand by and let her walk all over me. Wait, my dad said, his voice stern. You're really going to let $10,000 tear this family apart? You should be grateful for what you have. You've got a good fiancé, a bright future. Laura made a mistake, but it's not worth ruining everything over. Grateful? I said, my voice trembling with rage. You want me to be grateful for a sister who stole from me and parents who don't care? I've given this family everything, and this is how you repay me. That's enough, my dad snapped. You're being dramatic. If you want to throw a tantrum, fine. But we're not going to take sides in this. You already have, I said, my voice breaking. And it's not mine. I grabbed my coat and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind me. As I walked to my car, tears streamed down my face. I had come here looking for support, for understanding. Instead, I felt more alone than ever. Driving home, I kept replaying their words in my head. Be grateful for family. Stop being dramatic. You'll figure it out. But as much as their betrayal hurt, it also made one thing clear. If I wanted justice, I was going to have to fight for it myself. After my parents' reaction, I felt like I was standing on shaky ground, and every conversation about the wedding brought me closer to falling apart. The money wasn't just gone. It was stolen. And what made it worse was that the people who were supposed to love and support me had brushed it off as if it were nothing. It wasn't just the theft that hurt anymore. It was the betrayal. When I told Mike what had happened with Laura and my parents, his jaw tightened, and I could see the anger flash in his eyes. They really said that? He asked, his voice low but simmering with disbelief. I nodded, exhausted from repeating the story. They told me I was being dramatic, that I'd figure it out because I'm responsible with money. And they actually defended her. My mom said I should be happy for Laura because it was her milestone birthday. Mike shook his head and let out a bitter laugh. Unbelievable. I mean, I always knew Laura was spoiled, but I thought your parents would have your back. This is just wow. His anger mirrored mine, but he quickly shifted into problem-solving mode. Okay, he said, sitting beside me and pulling me close. Let's figure this out. We can still have a great wedding, even if we have to change some things. I don't want to change things, I admitted, my voice cracking. I worked so hard to save for this. I gave up so much for years because I wanted this one day to be perfect. And now, Mike placed his hand on mine, his touch grounding me. I know it's not fair. I know how much this meant to you. But at the end of the day, this wedding is about us, not Laura, not your parents, not anyone else. If we have to scale back, we'll still make it beautiful, and we'll still be married. That's what really matters, right? I nodded, but tears burned in my eyes. He was right, of course, but the principle of what had happened gnawed at me. Laura hadn't just stolen money. She had stolen my trust, my peace of mind, and the joy of planning one of the happiest days of my life. And my parents had stood by and let her do it. Over the next few days, Mike and I started reworking our plans. The grand venue was swapped for a smaller, more affordable one. I cut back on the guest list and scaled down the decorations. It hurt to let go of the vision I'd held onto for so long, but I tried to focus on what Mike had said. This wedding was about us, not the trappings. Still, I couldn't shake the anger. Every time I thought about Laura celebrating in her designer gown, sipping cocktails paid for with my hard-earned money, it made my blood boil. I decided I couldn't let her or my parents walk away from this without consequences. I started reaching out to family members, hoping to find some support. Aunt Rachel, who had always been one of the more level-headed members of the family, was my first call. When I told her what happened, she was appalled. "She did what?" Aunt Rachel said, her voice sharp with disbelief. "And your parents just brushed it off? That's ridiculous." "No, that's beyond ridiculous. It's enabling her terrible behavior. You have every right to be angry." Hearing someone validate my feelings was a relief, but it didn't change the fact that Laura had already done the damage. As I called other family members, I quickly realized Laura had been busy spinning her own version of the story. "She told us you were making a huge deal out of nothing," one cousin said hesitantly. "Like, she needed the money for something urgent, and you agreed to let her use it. And now you're upset because of wedding stress." Another relative told me, "Laura said you've always been obsessed with having the perfect wedding, and she thought you wouldn't mind helping her out a little. She made it sound like you're just being uptight." The more I heard, the angrier I became. Laura hadn't just taken my money. She had manipulated everyone into thinking I was the villain in this situation. The narrative she built made me sound like some selfish, materialistic bridezilla who couldn't share with her sister. It was infuriating, but what hurt even more was how easily some people seemed to believe her. These were family members who had known me my whole life, and yet they were willing to buy into Laura's lies. At that point, I wasn't sure if I even wanted these people at my wedding. How could I celebrate with them when they had so little respect for me? Mike noticed how much the situation was weighing on me. One night, as we were going over the revised budget, he put down his pen and said, "Listen, I know this is hard, but you need to think about what's going to make you happy. If having your parents and Laura there is going to ruin your day, then maybe it's time to set some boundaries." I thought about his words long after he said them. The idea of cutting out my parents and sister felt unthinkable, but so did the idea of pretending everything was fine. I realized I had to make a choice, not just about the wedding, but about how much I was willing to tolerate from people who clearly didn't respect me. By the end of the week, I made a decision. My wedding day was supposed to be a celebration of love and happiness, not a stage for family drama. If my parents and Laura couldn't understand that, then maybe they didn't deserve to be part of it. It was a painful decision, but as I started to focus on what really mattered, my future with Mike, I felt a sense of clarity. This wasn't just about a wedding anymore. It was about standing up for myself and refusing to let anyone take away the joy I'd worked so hard to create. A few weeks after my world had been turned upside down, my phone buzzed with an unexpected call. The screen showed Aunt Susan, and for a moment, I hesitated. Aunt Susan lived several states away and wasn't someone I spoke to often, outside of holidays and family events. But when I answered, her familiar, no-nonsense tone hit me like a lifeline. "Is it true, sweetheart?" she asked without preamble. "Did Laura really steal your wedding fund?" The way she said it, blunt, no sugarcoating, made me feel an immediate wave of relief. "Yeah, it's true," I said, my voice trembling despite my effort to sound composed. "And my parents are defending her. They told me to be grateful for family and move on." Aunt Susan's sharp intake of breath was satisfying in a way I hadn't expected. "That's absolutely appalling," she said, her voice tight with anger. "I just heard about it from Rachel. I had to call you. Are you okay?" That simple question hit me harder than I thought it would. I wasn't okay. Not really. I was angry, hurt, and exhausted from trying to fight a battle that felt like I was destined to lose. But hearing her anger on my behalf stirred something in me, a flicker of validation, a reminder that I wasn't being unreasonable. "No," I admitted quietly. "I'm not okay." I feel like my own family doesn't care about me, and I don't know what to do anymore. Aunt Susan let out a bitter laugh. Honey, I've seen this pattern for years. Your parents have always coddled Laura, even when it's obvious she's in the wrong. She's gotten away with so much because they can't bear to upset their golden child. But this is a whole new level of wrong. I felt a lump rise in my throat as she spoke. It was like she was putting into words all the things I hadn't been able to say out loud. I don't know how to make them see that, I said. They just keep brushing it off like it's not a big deal. But it is a big deal, Aunt Susan. It's not just about the money. It's the principle. It's about respect. You're absolutely right, she said firmly. And you have every right to demand accountability. Your parents and Laura need to understand that actions have consequences. If they're too blind to see that, then maybe it's time to stop worrying about how they'll react and start focusing on what's best for you. Her words felt like a slap and a hug at the same time. What do I even do? I asked, my voice cracking. I've tried reasoning with them, but it's like talking to a wall. They don't take me seriously. That's because they think you'll let it go, she said without hesitation. They've gotten used to you being the responsible one, the peacekeeper. But you don't owe them that anymore, not when they've shown you so little respect. You need to stand your ground, even if it makes them uncomfortable. Her conviction lit something in me, a stubborn resolve I hadn't felt in weeks. You're right, I said, sitting up straighter. I can't let them walk all over me. I've been trying to make them see my side, but maybe it's time I stop asking and start demanding. That's the spirit, Aunt Susan said warmly. And listen, if you need help covering the cost of the wedding, I'm here for you. I can lend you money to fill the gap. Her offer was so unexpected that I was momentarily speechless. I don't know what to say, I stammered. Thank you, but I don't want to drag you into this mess. Nonsense, she said briskly. You're my niece, and I'm not going to sit by while they treat you like this. But more importantly, I want you to know you're not alone in this. You have people in your corner, even if it doesn't feel like it right now. Tears welled up in my eyes as her words sank in. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. Thank you, Aunt Susan. That means more than you know. The next day, I decided it was time to confront my family again. But this time, I wasn't going in as the hurt, betrayed sister begging for understanding. I was going in as someone who deserved respect and wasn't afraid to demand it. I called a family meeting, Laura, my parents, and me. They all sounded surprised when I insisted on seeing them in person, but I didn't give them the option to say no. When we sat down in the living room, I wasted no time. We need to talk about what happened, I said, my voice steady. My mom sighed, already looking exasperated. Honey, we've been over this. Can't we just move on? No, we can't, I said firmly, because moving on means pretending like this didn't happen, and I'm not going to do that. Laura stole from me. That's not up for debate. And the fact that you're defending her instead of holding her accountable is unacceptable. Laura rolled her eyes. Leaning back on the couch like this was all a waste of her time. I told you I'll pay you back, she said, her tone dismissive. Do you even hear yourself? I snapped. You're acting like you borrowed a couple of bucks for gas. This was $10,000, Laura. You don't get to act like it's no big deal. All right, that's enough, my dad said, raising his voice slightly. We're not going to sit here and let you attack your sister. I'm not attacking her, I shot back. I'm holding her accountable. Something you should have done a long time ago. My dad started to respond, but I cut him off. No, you're going to listen to me for once. I've spent my whole life being the responsible one, the one who picks up the slack while Laura gets away with everything. But this time, I'm done. I'm not going to let you sweep this under the rug. Laura needs to pay me back, and until she does, I don't want to hear another word about moving on. My mom looked at me with something like shock, as if she couldn't believe I was standing up to them. You're serious about this, she said quietly. Dead serious, I said. And if you're not willing to support me in this, then maybe you don't deserve to be part of my life, or my wedding. There was a heavy silence in the room, and for the first time, I felt like they were actually hearing me. Whether they agreed or not didn't matter. What mattered was that I had finally stood my ground. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. The decision to confront Laura and my parents together wasn't easy. For days, I went back and forth in my mind, second-guessing myself. What if they twisted my words again? What if it turned into another round of them gaslighting me, brushing everything under the rug? But every time I thought about letting it go, I saw Laura's smug face in my mind, sipping cocktails at her ridiculous gala while I scrambled to salvage my wedding plans. No, I wasn't letting this go. Mike and I planned everything carefully. He would be there to support me, but but he knew this was my fight. "This is your moment to stand up to them," he said the night before. "You've got this. Just stick to the facts and don't let them derail you." The next evening, my parents and Laura arrived for dinner. I had kept the invitation vague, not wanting to give them time to strategize or come up with excuses. Laura breezed in like nothing was wrong, smiling brightly and chatting about her day. My parents followed, their expressions neutral but wary. As we sat down to eat, the tension in the room was palpable. I skipped the small talk and went straight to the point. "We need to talk about the money Laura took from me," I said, my voice steady but firm. The room went silent. My dad frowned, and my mom sighed heavily, like she was already tired of the conversation. Laura, of course, rolled her eyes. "Oh, come on," she said, picking at her food. "Are we really still talking about this?" "Yes, we are," I said sharply. "Because you stole $10,000 from me, Laura. That's not something I can just move on from." Laura huffed, crossing her arms. "I told you I'd pay you back. Why are you making this such a big deal?" Mike leaned forward, his face calm but serious. "Because it is a big deal, Laura. That money wasn't yours, and it wasn't just some spare change. It was for our wedding, something she's been working toward for years. You don't just get to brush that off." Laura scoffed. "Okay, but I didn't mean to ruin anything. I just needed the money for my party. It's not like I wasted it on something stupid." "Your party was stupid," I snapped, unable to hold back anymore. "It was a selfish, over-the-top waste of money that you had no right to spend. And you didn't even ask. You stole it, Laura. Stop pretending this is anything else." My dad cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "All right, let's all take a step back. Laura made a mistake, but she didn't do it to hurt you. She said she'd pay you back, and I think we need to give her time to do that." I turned to him, incredulous. "Time to do what, Dad? She doesn't even have a plan to pay me back. She hasn't apologized, and she's sitting here acting like I'm the bad guy for being upset. How is that okay?" My mom tried to jump in. "Sweetheart, we're family. We need to support each other, not tear each other down over money." "Laura didn't mean any harm." "This isn't about harm," I interrupted. "It's about accountability. Family doesn't mean you get to treat people however you want and expect them to just take it. Laura stole from me, and if she doesn't pay me back, I'm going to take legal action." The room erupted. My dad slammed his hand on the table. "Are you serious? You take your own sister to court over this?" Laura's face turned pale, but she quickly shifted into her favorite role, the victim. Tears welled up in her eyes, and her voice quivered as she said, "I can't believe you do this to me. I thought we were sisters. How can you be so heartless?" I felt a familiar pang of guilt, one I knew Laura was counting on, but I pushed it aside. I looked her straight in the eye and said, "Heartless? You want to talk about heartless? You took $10,000 from me without asking, and you don't even care how much it hurt me. You're only upset because you're finally being held accountable." Mike chimed in, his voice calm but firm. "We're not asking for much, Laura. Just pay back what you took. That's the bare minimum. If you can't do that, what are we supposed to think?" My mom was shaking her head, her voice rising. "You're blowing this way out of proportion. Laura's your sister. She made a mistake, and you're threatening to ruin her life over it. Where's your compassion? Where was her compassion when she decided to take my money?" I shot back. "Why is it always my job to forgive and move on? Why can't you hold Laura accountable for once in her life?" The tears on Laura's face had turned into angry glares. "You're unbelievable," she said. "You've always been like this, so obsessed with being perfect, so judgmental. You can't stand that I needed help for once, can you?" I laughed bitterly. "Help? You didn't ask for help, Laura. You helped yourself. There's a difference." The conversation went in circles for another half hour, with my parents trying to mediate and Laura alternating between playing the victim and lashing out. But I didn't back down. For the first time in my life, I didn't let their excuses or guilt-tripping sway me. By the end of the night, the message was clear. If Laura didn't repay me, I would follow through with legal action. My parents were horrified by the idea, but I didn't care anymore. As they left, Laura gave me one last tearful look. "You've really changed," she said, her voice dripping with self-pity. "No, Laura," I said, holding the door open for her. "I finally decided to stop letting you walk all over me. That's the only thing that's changed." When the door closed behind them, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and relief. For the first time in years, I had stood up for myself and refused to let my family bully me into silence. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't backing down. Not this time. The day after the dinner confrontation, I was emotionally drained but resolute. I'd stood my ground and made it clear to Laura and my parents that I wasn't backing down. Still, I could tell the battle wasn't over. My parents were too invested in protecting Laura to simply let the issue rest, and I knew they'd try to wear me down. I didn't have to wait long for the next skirmish. My phone rang early the next morning. It was my mom. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but I decided to answer. "Hi, Mom," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Honey, we need to talk," she began, her voice heavy with that familiar mix of guilt and exasperation. "You can't seriously be thinking about going to the police over this. She's your sister." "I am thinking about it," I replied calmly, "because that's the only way she's going to take this seriously. You've made it clear you're not going to hold her accountable, so what choice do I have?" Mom sighed dramatically, and I could picture her sitting at the kitchen table, shaking her head in disappointment. "This is tearing the family apart," she said. "Don't you see that? All this anger, all this fighting. It's not worth it. You're letting money come between you and your sister." That line pushed me over the edge. "No, Mom," I snapped. "Laura already tore the family apart when she stole from me, and you and Dad made it worse by defending her. Don't put this on me." "Sweetheart, we're not defending her," she insisted, though her tone said otherwise. "We're just trying to keep the peace. You don't want to see her life ruined over this, do you?" I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. Her life? What about my life? What about the years I spent saving that money and the stress she caused me by taking it? Why does Laura's happiness always come first? Mom faltered. "That's not what I meant. We don't want things to escalate. We're family, and family is supposed to forgive. Forgiveness doesn't mean ignoring what happened," I said. "And I've spent my entire life forgiving Laura for everything because you've taught her she can do whatever she wants without consequences. But this time is different. This time, it's not just about her bad behavior. It's about theft, and I'm not going to let it slide." Later that afternoon, Dad called me. His approach was less emotional, but no less frustrating. "Look, kiddo," he said in that placating tone he always used when he wanted to avoid conflict. "We know Laura messed up. We're not saying she was right. But don't you think threatening to call the cops is a bit extreme? She's your sister, for crying out loud." "Dad, this isn't about being extreme," I replied, my voice firm. "This is about accountability. Laura isn't going to change unless she's forced to. And if she doesn't pay me back, I will file a police report." Dad sighed. "Can't you give her more time? She doesn't have that kind of money right now." "Then maybe you and Mom should figure out how to come up with it," I said bluntly. "You've spent years bailing her out of every mess she's made. Why should this be any different?" That seemed to hit a nerve. "We're not made of money, you know," he muttered. "It's not like we can just pull 10 grand out of thin air." "Neither can I said coldly. But that didn't stop Laura from helping herself to my savings. "So, here's the deal. You have 2 weeks to figure out how to repay me. If you don't, I'll take legal action." "I'm not bluffing, Dad. And if that means things get messy, that's on Laura, not me." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, Dad said, "We'll figure something out." Over the next several days, I noticed a shift in their tone. My parents were no longer dismissive or condescending when they spoke to me. Instead, they seemed uneasy. My mom stopped calling altogether, which was probably her way of expressing disapproval, while Dad kept his conversations brief and to the point. Laura, on the other hand, was doing everything she could to play the victim. She sent me a string of texts, each one more manipulative than the last. "You're seriously going to ruin my life over this?" One message read. "I can't believe you'd go this far. Do you even care about me?" said another. But I didn't respond. I was done engaging with her. Every time she tried to guilt-trip me, I reminded myself of Aunt Susan's words. "You don't owe them anything. Stand your ground." A week into my ultimatum, I got a call from Dad. His tone was uncharacteristically strained. "Your mom and I have been talking," he said. "And, well, we think we might be able to help Laura pay you back. But it's going to take some time." "How much time?" I asked, my guard up. "Another month, maybe 2, he said. "We'll cover half, and Laura's going to have to figure out the rest. But we need you to promise you won't go to the police." I considered his words carefully. Part of me wanted to refuse outright. Why should I give them more time when they'd already dismissed my feelings and tried to guilt me into dropping the whole thing? But another part of me recognized that this was the first time they were taking me seriously. 2 weeks, I said firmly. "That's the deadline I gave you, and I'm sticking to it. If you can come up with half by then, I'll give you another month for the rest." But if nothing happens in 2 weeks, I'm filing a report. End of discussion. Dad muttered something about doing our best and hung up. By the end of the 2 weeks, my parents managed to scrape together $5,000. I didn't ask where it came from. I didn't care. They handed me a check, looking equal parts resentful and embarrassed, and promised the rest would come soon. For the first time in years, I felt like they were actually listening to me. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a start. And as much as it hurt to put my foot down, I knew I'd done the right thing. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about respect. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was finally getting some. A few weeks after my ultimatum, Laura finally came up with half of the money she owed me. I suspected my parents had helped her, but I didn't care where it came from as long as I got what I was owed. She handed me a check in person, her demeanor a mix of defiance and self-pity. There, she said, shoving the check into my hand. Happy now? Halfway, I replied, tucking the check into my wallet without so much as glancing at it. I told you I'm not dropping this until I get every cent. Laura rolled her eyes, crossing her arms like a petulant teenager. You're so dramatic. I already said I'd pay you back. What more do you want? I stared at her, incredulous. What more do I want? Maybe for you to take responsibility for what you did and stop acting like you're the victim here. Her jaw tightened, and I could see the tears welling up. But I wasn't falling for it this time. You don't get to cry your way out of this, Laura, I said coldly. Not anymore. She left without another word, and I could feel the tension in the air as she slammed the door behind her. It was the kind of exit she loved to make, loud, dramatic, designed to make everyone else feel like the bad guy. But I didn't feel bad. Not this time. A few days later, my mom called, and I knew immediately what the conversation was going to be about. Sweetheart, she began, her tone dripping with that familiar mix of guilt and exasperation. I know you're upset with Laura, but don't you think it's time to move on? She's trying, isn't she? She gave you half the money already. Mom, I said, cutting her off. She gave me half because I forced her to, and she still owes me the other half. Until she pays me back in full, I'm not dropping this. I just don't understand why you're being so harsh, she said, her voice wavering. She's your sister, and she's trying her best. Can't you see that? I let out a bitter laugh. Trying her best? Mom, the only reason she's paying me back at all is because I threatened legal action. That's not trying her best. That's self-preservation. She feels terrible about what happened, Mom said, her voice softening as if that would somehow make me change my mind. No, she doesn't, I shot back. If she felt terrible, she wouldn't have taken the money in the first place. And even now, she's acting like I'm the bad guy for standing up for myself. How is that remorse? There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, my mom said, I just wish things didn't have to be like this. You used to be so close. Did we? I asked, my voice sharp. Because from where I'm standing, it feels like I've spent my whole life cleaning up her messes while you and Dad look the other way. This time, I'm not letting it slide. And if you can't accept that, then maybe you shouldn't be at my wedding either. That last part slipped out before I could stop myself. But once the words were out, I didn't regret them. The final straw came when Laura texted me a few weeks later to say she had the remaining money. When I went to pick it up, she greeted me at the door with a smug expression. Here you go, she said, handing me an envelope filled with cash. I hope you're satisfied. I am, I replied coolly, tucking the envelope into my bag. But don't think this means everything is fine between us. Laura's expression shifted, her smugness replaced with anger. What's that supposed to mean? It means you're not coming to my wedding, I said bluntly. I can't trust you, Laura, and I'm not going to let you ruin my day the way you've ruined everything else. Her mouth fell open, and for a moment, I thought she was going to explode. But then the tears started. You're really doing this? She sobbed. You're cutting me out of your wedding? How could you? How could I? I said, my voice rising. Laura, you stole from me. You lied to everyone about what happened, and even now, you're acting like the victim. You don't get to cry your way out of this. Not this time. She tried calling me cruel, heartless, ungrateful, but I didn't care. I'd heard it all before, and none of it mattered anymore. When I told my parents about my decision, they were predictably outraged. She's your sister, my mom said, her voice shaking with disbelief. You can't just cut her out of such an important day. Watch me, I said simply. This is going to tear the family apart, my dad added, his tone accusatory. No, I replied, meeting his gaze. Laura already tore the family apart when she stole from me. You both made it worse by defending her. I'm just choosing not to let her keep hurting me. They tried everything to get me to change my mind. Guilt trips, emotional appeals, even subtle threats about how I'd regret this decision someday, but I didn't budge. For the first time in my life, I felt completely at peace with my decision. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Without Laura's negativity and my parents' constant excuses, I could finally focus on what mattered: my relationship with Mike and the life we were building together. Our guest list was smaller than I'd originally planned, but it felt right. The people who were there were the ones who truly cared about us: friends, supportive family members, and a few of Mike's co-workers who had become like family to us. On the day of the wedding, as I walked down the aisle toward Mike, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. It wasn't the wedding I'd imagined all those years ago, but it was perfect in its own way. Laura and my parents weren't there, and for the first time, that didn't bother me. I knew I had made the right choice, for myself, for my happiness, and for my future. Our wedding day dawned bright and crisp, a perfect reflection of the fresh start Mike and I were about to embark on together. Despite all the chaos leading up to it, the stolen money, the family drama, the tense confrontations, it felt like everything had fallen into place. The venue was smaller than what I had originally planned, but it was charming and intimate. Rows of white chairs lined a garden path, and the early autumn leaves added splashes of gold and red to the scenery. It wasn't the grand, magazine-worthy wedding I had dreamed of for years, but as I looked around at the faces of people who truly cared about us, I realized it was better than anything I could have imagined. My Aunt Susan flew in 2 days before the wedding and immediately stepped into the role of honorary mother of the bride. She was a whirlwind of support and practicality, helping me with last-minute details and keeping me calm when I started to spiral. "You've got everything you need right here," she told me as she pinned my veil into place that morning. "A man who loves you, friends who support you, and a backbone stronger than most people ever find in their lifetime. Don't let anyone make you feel like you need more than that." Her words stayed with me throughout the day, grounding me as I walked down the aisle toward Mike. He looked at me with such warmth and love that all the stress and heartache melted away. In that moment, it didn't matter who wasn't there. All that mattered was the future we were building together. The reception was small but lively, filled with laughter, music, and more heartfelt moments than I could count. Aunt Susan gave a toast that had me in tears, calling us the real family she was proud to know. "Family isn't just about blood," she said, raising her glass. "It's about showing up, being there for each other, and treating each other with respect. And today, I see nothing but love and respect in this room. That's what matters most." Her words were met with a chorus of cheers and clinking glasses. As I looked around the room, I realized she was right. The people who had shown up for us, both literally and figuratively, were the ones who mattered most. As for my parents and Laura, their absence cast a shadow, but it wasn't the oppressive weight I had feared it might be. In the days leading up to the wedding, I had wrestled with the idea of inviting them at the last minute, hoping for some kind of reconciliation. But every time I thought about it, I remembered the betrayal, the excuses, and the way they had dismissed my feelings. I missed the idea of a close family, the kind you see in movies and hear about from friends. But I knew now that what I had wanted from my parents and Laura was something they weren't capable of giving me: respect, accountability, and genuine support. The distance between us was painful, but it was also necessary. Setting boundaries with them had been one of the hardest things I'd ever done, but it was also one of the most liberating. For years, I had been the one to bend, to compromise, to keep the peace at my own expense. This time, I had chosen myself, and it felt like a victory. After the wedding, Mike and I took a short honeymoon to a cozy cabin in the mountains. It wasn't the lavish trip we had originally planned, but it was exactly what we needed: quiet, peaceful, and filled with long talks about the life we wanted to build together. One night, as we sat by the fire, I told Mike how grateful I was for him. "You've been my rock through all of this," I said, holding his hand. "I don't know how I would have gotten through it without you." "You didn't need me to get through it," he said, his voice soft but firm. "You're stronger than you think. I just helped remind you of that." His words stuck with me. For so long, I had defined myself by my relationships with my family, by my role as the responsible daughter and sister. But this whole ordeal had shown me that I was so much more than that. I was capable of standing up for myself, of setting boundaries, of demanding the respect I deserved. In the months following the wedding, I maintained my distance from my parents and Laura. They made a few half-hearted attempts to reach out: an awkward phone call from my dad, a guilt-laden text from my mom, but I kept my boundaries firm. Laura sent a long-winded message about how I had ruined the family dynamic and how she hoped I could find it in my heart to forgive her someday. I didn't respond. I wasn't ready to forgive her, and I wasn't sure I ever would be. Aunt Susan, on the other hand, became a regular part of my life. She called me every week to check in, and we made plans to visit her in the spring. She filled a void I hadn't realized existed, reminding me that family isn't about who you're born into. It's about who shows up for you. Looking back, I don't regret standing my ground. It wasn't just about the money. It was about demanding respect and refusing to let anyone, even family, take advantage of me. Our wedding may have been smaller than I had originally planned, but it was filled with love, laughter, and the kind of genuine connections that no amount of money could buy. As Mike and I settle into our new life together, I feel lighter, freer, and more hopeful than I've felt in years. I've let go of the toxic dynamics that weighed me down, and in their place, I've found strength, peace, and the start of something beautiful. This fresh start isn't just about my marriage, it's about me. And for the first time, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm meant to be.